I didn't scream when I heard them. That's the part people always imagine differently when I tell this story. They picture a woman kicking open a door, throwing a chair, maybe grabbing someone by the collar. Something loud, something dramatic. But when the moment actually arrived, I just stood there, still, quiet. And the strange part is, while those sounds were coming from my husband's office, there was a lottery ticket worth $50 million sitting inside my purse. I know how that sounds. Like two completely different stories that somehow collided in the same hallway. But that afternoon, they did. Let me slow down for a second. Because when I replay that day in my mind, it doesn't move in a straight line. It comes back in fragments. Small details first, then the bigger ones. The weight of my purse strap digging into my shoulder. The faint smell of carpet cleaner in the office building. My son Liam's hand in mine, sticky from the candy he'd finished in the car. 7 years old. Skinny arms. One loose shoelace dragging across the hallway carpet behind him. And me standing there thinking my life had just become unbelievably good. Actually, wait. It wasn't exactly 50 million. The jackpot headline said 50 million when the numbers were announced, but the ticket I was holding showed 58 point something million before taxes. I remember staring at the number earlier that day like it was written in a language I barely understood. $58 million. Even now it feels strange to say that out loud. The ticket itself didn't look special. Just a thin piece of paper with tiny printed numbers and that dull silver scratch layer I'd rubbed off with a coin in my car. No glowing lights. No orchestra music. Just numbers. But those numbers meant something enormous. And I couldn't wait to tell Amdian. My husband worked downtown in a glass office building that overlooked the river, tall panels reflecting the sky so brightly you almost had to squint walking up to the entrance. He loved that building, loved the feeling of working somewhere that looked important from the outside. Marketing firm, lots of meetings, fancy presentations. Words like brand alignment and client acquisition floating around our dinner table most evenings. I used to tease him about it. He'd roll his eyes and say, "You wouldn't understand the corporate battlefield." Which always made me laugh because the only battlefield in our house was Liam refusing to eat vegetables. Simple life. Comfortable life. Or at least, that's what I believed at the time. Anyway, earlier that afternoon I had stopped at a small convenience store near our neighborhood, the kind of place where the coffee machine always smells slightly burnt and the floor tiles are older than the refrigerator units. The lottery machine sat beside the counter. I didn't walk in planning to buy a ticket. Honestly, I rarely did. But the lottery shop owner, older guy with thick glasses who'd worked there for years, looked at the total on the register and said casually, "You're 80 cents away from $20. Want to try your luck today?" Just like that. A small moment. I shrugged and said yes. That was it. I scratched the ticket while sitting in the car outside the store, sunlight hitting the windshield so hard I had to tilt the paper sideways to see the numbers clearly. At first I thought I'd read them wrong. Actually, I didn't even realize what I was looking at for a good 30 seconds. My brain just stared at the numbers without connecting them. Then I checked again. And again. Then I pulled up the lottery website on my phone and compared the results one by one. Every number matched. I remember sitting there whispering, "No, that's not right." But it was. Completely right. The first person I thought about telling was Amdian. Not my sister. Not my best friend. My husband. I imagined walking into his office, showing him the ticket, watching that serious professional face crack open in pure disbelief. Maybe we'd laugh. Maybe he'd hug me so hard the receptionist would stare. Maybe we'd take Liam out for ice cream afterward and talk about crazy things like vacations and college funds. So I drove straight downtown. Didn't even call first. Liam sat in the back seat kicking the chair rhythmically while humming some cartoon theme song. I barely noticed the traffic lights changing because my mind kept running ahead into this imagined future. New possibilities. Freedom. Relief. It felt like the universe had quietly slid a golden key into my hand. The office building lobby was cool and quiet when we walked in. The receptionist, young woman with dark hair pulled into a tight bun, gave me a polite smile. "Can I help you?" "I'm here to see my husband," I said. "Amdian." She nodded and pointed down the hallway. "Second door on the left." The carpet softened our footsteps as Liam and I walked down that corridor together. He started humming again under his breath, swinging our joined hands slightly as we moved. And I remember thinking I should probably ask him to stop humming because it felt a little too loud for a workplace. But I didn't, because halfway down that hallway, I heard something. At first it sounded like a chair shifting, then a low laugh, a woman's voice. I slowed down. Another sound followed, quieter, closer, not the kind of sound people make during a business meeting. Liam tugged on my hand. "Mom." But I wasn't looking at him, I was staring at the closed office door with my husband's name on it, and the sounds coming from the other side suddenly made the lottery ticket in my purse feel very, very heavy. Before that hallway, before the door, life had felt steady in a quiet, predictable way. Not exciting, not dramatic, just steady. Amdian and I had been married 16 years at that point. No, wait, 17. I always shave 1 year off by accident when I say it out loud. We married young enough that time blurred together after Liam was born. 17 years. You learn a person's rhythms after that long. The way they clear their throat before saying something uncomfortable. The way they leave one cabinet door slightly open in the kitchen, no matter how many times you point it out. Small habits. Amdian had dozens. He drank his coffee black and always left the mug half an inch from the coaster instead of on it. Not sure why. He'd read business articles on his phone during breakfast, squinting at the screen like the fate of the economy depended on his opinion. And every morning before work he'd stand near the front door adjusting his tie in the mirror we kept by the coat rack. That mirror had been there since our first apartment. Same frame. Same tiny crack in the corner. Some things just stay. I worked from home most days doing bookkeeping for a small local construction company. Numbers. Receipts. Quiet spreadsheets that never argued with me. Liam would come home from school around 3:30, toss his backpack near the stairs, and start telling me stories about his teacher, Mrs. Alvarez. She had this habit of writing motivational quotes on the classroom whiteboard. Liam once came home confused because one of them said fortune favors the bold. He asked me if that meant pirates got better luck than normal people. Kids think in straight lines. Life rarely does. Our house wasn't big. 2 bedrooms upstairs. A small yard in the back where the grass always grew uneven because the neighbor's old oak tree stole most of the sunlight. That neighbor, Mr. Dorsey, would wave at us from his porch every evening around 6 while watering plants that looked half dead no matter how much care he gave them. Routine. Everything about our lives fit into quiet patterns like that, which is why winning the lottery felt so impossible when it happened. People assume a jackpot must arrive into chaos or desperation. But my life that morning had been completely ordinary. I packed Liam's lunch. I reminded him to bring back his math worksheet. I waved goodbye to Amdian as he backed the car out of the driveway. He even called out through the open window, "Don't forget we're meeting Greg next week about the investment idea." Greg was his boss at the marketing firm. Big personality. Loud laugh. The kind of man who shook hands like he was testing your grip strength. Anyway, when Amdian drove away that morning, he looked exactly like he always did heading to work. Slightly rushed. Already thinking about emails waiting on his computer. Nothing strange. Well, maybe one small thing. Actually, no, I'm not sure if it counts as strange. Memory plays tricks when you look backward at moments like that. But I remember he hesitated for a second before pulling away. Not long. Just enough to glance down at his phone again. Then he drove off. At the time I assumed it was a woke message. That's the problem with trust. You explain things away automatically. Let me ask you something for a second. Have you ever looked back at a completely normal day and realized later there was a tiny signal hiding inside it? Something small you ignored because your life felt too stable to question it. If that's happened to you, I'm curious what it looked like. People carry those moments differently. For me, That day kept moving forward like nothing unusual had happened. I finished my bookkeeping work by early afternoon and drove to the convenience store for milk and bread. Liam was already out of school because his teacher had a training day, so he came with me, bouncing around the store aisles like he'd been released from a cage. That's when the lottery ticket entered the story. $20 even. Scratch. Numbers. Shock. Then the long, quiet drive downtown while my brain tried to understand what kind of future $58 million could build. When we reached Amdian's office building, Liam was still humming in the elevator, a tune from that dinosaur show he watched every morning before school. The receptionist recognized Amdian's name immediately when I said it. She had that calm, professional voice people develop after answering phones all day. Second hallway. His office is on the left. Simple directions. Nothing unusual. But as Liam and I walked down that carpeted corridor, I remember noticing something odd. The door to the conference room stood slightly open. Inside, the chairs were pushed back from the table like a meeting had ended quickly. Papers scattered across the surface. One coffee cup tipped sideways near a laptop charger. Empty room. For a moment I wondered if Amdian might still be in there finishing something. But then we kept walking, and halfway down the hallway, I heard a sound. Soft. Unexpected. A woman laughing behind a closed office door. A laugh that definitely didn't belong to the receptionist at the front desk. I slowed down. Not because I suspected anything yet. More like curiosity. Workplaces are usually quiet in the middle of the afternoon. But the closer I stepped toward that door, the more the sounds inside it stopped sounding like work at all. The first sound was a laugh. Soft. Low. The kind of laugh people use when they are trying not to be heard. At first my brain didn't attach it to anything serious. Offices have visitors. Co-workers drop in. People joke around behind closed doors all the time. That's what I told myself while standing there. Just normal office noise. But then the chair inside scraped across the floor. Not the quick scrape of someone standing up for a meeting. Slower. Dragging slightly. Like weight shifting. And that's when something inside my chest tightened. Not panic. More like awareness. The kind you get when you suddenly realize a room has gone quiet behind you. Liam tugged my hand again. Mom, is Dad busy? I didn't answer right away. I was still staring at the nameplate on the door. Amdian K. Mercer, Senior Account Manager. The letters were polished metal. Slightly crooked on the wall. Actually, I'd noticed that months earlier when I visited during a company holiday party. Funny the details your brain stores. Another sound came from inside. A soft thump. Then the woman laughed again. Different this time. Lower. Closer. And suddenly the hallway felt smaller. I shifted my purse higher on my shoulder without thinking. The strap had started digging into my collarbone. That lottery ticket inside suddenly felt absurdly out of place, like I'd brought a firework into a library. Something didn't add up. Still, I hesitated, because suspicion is a strange thing. It doesn't arrive fully formed. It creeps in quietly and waits for permission. Maybe it was a client. Maybe someone had dropped something. Maybe, actually, no. The next sound erased most of those possibilities. A voice. Amdian's voice. Muffled, but unmistakable. And the tone wasn't the one he used during conference calls or work meetings. I knew his professional voice well. Clear. Slightly louder. Polished. This voice was different. Lower. Private. For a moment I stood perfectly still, listening. Not intentionally. My body just refused to move. I think part of me was hoping the next thing I heard would make everything make sense again. A normal sentence. A discussion about a marketing proposal. Anything like that. But instead, there was a pause. Then the faint sound of fabric moving. The kind of soft friction you only notice in a quiet room. Liam started humming again beside me, swinging our joined hands back and forth. Mom, he whispered, can we go see Dad now? His voice snapped me back into the hallway. Right. My son was standing next to me, 7 years old, waiting to tell his father we'd just become unbelievably rich. I glanced down at him and forced a small smile. Just a second. My voice sounded steady, but inside, something had shifted slightly, like the first crack in a frozen lake. I took a step closer to the office door, not dramatically, just enough that I could see the thin strip of light beneath it. Another movement inside, a chair bumping the desk, and then a woman's voice, soft, playful. I couldn't make out the exact words, only the tone, that intimate half-whisper people use when they are standing very close to someone. My stomach tightened, not pain exactly, more like gravity suddenly pulling in a different direction. I remember thinking, this might not be what it sounds like, and then immediately wondering why my mind had jumped there so fast. Funny thing, your instincts often arrive before your logic does. I adjusted my grip on Liam's hand. He looked up at me with that curious expression kids get when adults start acting strange. Why aren't we going in? Good question. I was asking myself the same thing. A part of me wanted to knock right then, push the door open, end the uncertainty in one clean moment. But another part of me hesitated, because once a door like that opens, whatever is inside it can't be unseen. And for the first time since scratching that lottery ticket in the parking lot earlier that day, I felt something heavier than excitement sitting in my chest. Doubt. I stood there listening for another few seconds, long enough to hear the woman laugh one more time, long enough to hear Amdian answer her in that same low voice. And that's when the real question settled into my mind. Not what was happening in that office, but what I was going to do next. Do I open the door and face whatever's inside? Or do I step away and find out the truth another way? I wish I could say I opened the door immediately. Clean. Direct. No hesitation. But that isn't what happened. Instead, I stepped back. Just one step. Not far enough for Liam to notice anything strange, but far enough that the sounds from inside the office softened again into muffled shapes instead of clear signals. I bent down slightly toward him. "Hey," I said quietly, "why don't you wait right here for a minute?" He frowned. "Why?" "Dad might be on a work call." That explanation came out automatically, the kind of polite lie adults use when they don't want children wandering into complicated situations. Liam accepted it with the simple logic of a 7-year-old. "Oh." He leaned against the hallway wall and started tapping the toe of his sneaker against the carpet in a slow rhythm. Tap, tap, tap. I straightened up and looked again at the door. My husband's door. And for a moment I noticed something I hadn't seen before. A thin strip of light under the door, and a shadow moving across it. 2 shadows. Actually, I almost convinced myself my eyes were playing tricks. Office lights shift when people move around. Someone could have been reaching for a file cabinet, or adjusting blinds. Or, no, the second shadow moved again, closer to the first. Then the chair scraped once more, longer this time. The sound echoed softly through the hallway. My throat felt dry. Not dramatic dryness, just that strange tight feeling you get when your body realizes a conversation is about to become uncomfortable. I reached for the door handle. Stopped. Actually, no, that's not exactly right. My hand hovered near it. I didn't fully grab it yet. The metal knob reflected the hallway lights in a dull blur, and for some reason I found myself staring at that reflection like it might offer instructions. People like to believe they'd react instantly in moments like this, but real life rarely moves that cleanly. Inside the office, something shifted again. Fabric. A quiet laugh. Then Amdian's voice. Low. Close. I couldn't hear the words, but I recognized the tone. I'd heard that voice before, years earlier, when our relationship was still new and we'd whisper things late at night after Liam had fallen asleep. That memory arrived suddenly, sharp, unexpected, and that's when the truth finally settled in. Not fully, not like a courtroom verdict, but enough. Enough that the hallway suddenly felt colder. I swallowed and gently knocked on the door. 2 taps. Nothing dramatic, just polite. The sounds inside stopped immediately, completely. For a second there was absolute silence behind the door. Then movement. Fast movement. A chair bumping something hard. A desk drawer sliding shut. I heard a woman whisper something quickly. Amdian answered in a low voice I couldn't quite make out. My heart wasn't racing the way people describe in stories. If anything, everything inside me felt strangely quiet. Like my body had switched into observation mode. The door opened a few seconds later. Amdian stood there. His tie was loosened, top button of his shirt undone, and behind him, Beath. I didn't know her name at that exact moment yet. That came later, from the receptionist downstairs and a few very awkward phone calls afterward. But I recognized her face. She worked in the same office. I'd seen her once at a company holiday event months earlier. Tall woman. Light brown hair pulled into a loose bun. Marketing coordinator, I think. Or maybe project manager. I might be mixing that detail up now. It doesn't really matter. What mattered was the way she stepped slightly away from the desk when the door opened. Not running. Not hiding. Just creating space. Her lipstick looked freshly smudged. Amdian blinked at me, like someone waking from a nap. Camora. His voice carried that confused tone people use when reality doesn't match their expectations. Then his eyes moved down. He noticed Liam standing beside me. Then my purse. Then the silence stretching in the hallway. Behind him, Beath smoothed the front of her blouse slowly. No one spoke for several seconds. I became very aware of the fluorescent lights humming above us. That faint electric buzz again. Liam broke the silence first. "Hi, Dad." His voice sounded cheerful. Normal. And that's when the weight of the moment finally pressed down on me. Because whatever had just happened inside that office, my son was standing right here in the middle of it. 7 years old. Holding my hand. I took a slow breath and looked directly at Amdian. For a moment I considered saying something sharp. Something explosive. But instead I reached into my purse, pulled out the lottery ticket, and held it up between us. "I came to tell you something," I said. My voice sounded calm, steadier than I expected, but inside, a different realization was forming. Not about the money, about the marriage. And if you've ever stood in a moment like that, realizing the life you thought you understood might not actually exist the way you believed, you know how strange that silence feels. If that's something you've experienced yourself, betrayal like this, I'd genuinely like to hear how you handled it. People carry those moments differently, and sometimes hearing other perspectives helps make sense of your own. Because standing there in that hallway, I knew one thing for certain. The worst part of the day hadn't even started yet. For a few seconds, no one moved. I held the lottery ticket between my fingers like it was a grocery receipt instead of a piece of paper that could rearrange an entire life. Amdian looked at it, then at me, then at Liam. His mouth opened slightly, but nothing came out. Behind him, Beath shifted her weight from one foot to the other. The office smelled faintly of coffee and that artificial lemon cleaner companies use on desks. I noticed a red folder half hanging off the edge of the table behind her. Details like that stick. Odd things. Liam tugged on my sleeve. "Mom, what is that?" I looked down at him and forced a small smile. Something important. That was true, though maybe not in the way I first imagined when I drove there. Amdian finally spoke. "What's going on?" His voice sounded careful now. Controlled. The way people talk when they realize a situation might be sliding towards something complicated. I held the ticket out toward him. "I won." He blinked. "Won what?" "The lottery." For a second I thought he hadn't heard me correctly. His face didn't change right away. Then his eyes flicked down to the ticket again. The numbers. The logo. The printed amount. He stepped forward slowly and took it from my hand. "Actually, no, that's not quite right." He reached for it first, then hesitated halfway, like touching it might somehow confirm everything that had just happened in the last 30 seconds. Finally he took it, looked at it, looked again. Beath leaned slightly forward from the desk. "What is it?" Amdian didn't answer her. He was staring at the numbers. His forehead tightened in that focused way he always had when reading complicated emails. Is this real? I nodded once. I checked the numbers 3 times. Then I added, almost automatically, for actually. I used the website too. My voice sounded distant to my own ears, because while he was processing the money, I was still processing the room. The chair pushed too close to the desk. His loosened tie. Beeth standing near the filing cabinet pretending to study a document that she clearly hadn't opened. 2 completely different realities were sitting inside the same office. Amdian finally exhaled. Camora, this is unbelievable. He laughed softly. Short. Almost disbelieving. Then he looked at Liam. Buddy, do you know what this means? Liam shrugged. Are we getting ice cream? That almost made me smile again. Almost. Amdian rubbed the back of his neck and glanced quickly toward Beeth. Just a flick of the eyes. A silent calculation happening behind his expression. And that was the moment something shifted inside me. Not anger. Not yet. More like clarity. Because suddenly I understood something that hadn't been obvious 5 minutes earlier. This moment wasn't about catching him. It was about what I did next. I could explode right there in the office. Accuse him. Expose everything in front of Beeth and anyone else who might walk down that hallway. Or I could slow the entire situation down. Control it. That thought surprised me a little. Actually, no, surprised isn't the right word. It felt more like instinct. A quiet voice in the back of my mind saying, don't waste your position. So I took a breath and stepped into the office fully. Congratulations, Beeth said suddenly, her voice careful. She gave a polite smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. That's incredible news. I looked at her. Not long. Just long enough to let the silence stretch between us. Then I turned back to Amdian. We should probably talk about this tonight, I said. He nodded quickly. Yes, absolutely. Too quickly, maybe. Liam started wandering toward the window behind Amdian's desk, fascinated by the view of cars moving along the street below. Kids move on fast. Adults, not so much. I studied my husband's face again, trying to read something inside it. Guilt, fear, relief. Honestly, I'm still not sure which one was strongest in that moment. Memory gets fuzzy when emotions are layered like that. But one thing became very clear to me while standing there. Money changes the balance of a conversation. And $58 million. That shifts the entire table. So I took the ticket back gently from his hand, folded it once, placed it back inside my purse. Then I looked directly at him and said, very calmly, we'll figure everything out tonight. My voice sounded steady, but inside I had already started planning the next steps. Who I needed to call, what questions needed answers, and how much of my future I was willing to rebuild from the ground up. Before we left the office, I paused near the door and looked back at Amdian one more time. There was a question forming in my mind, not just about him, about values, about choices people make when the ground beneath their lives suddenly shifts. So I'll ask you something honestly. If you discovered betrayal and life-changing money in the same moment, would you confront everything immediately? Or would you take control first and decide the timing of the truth later? I didn't know yet if my decision was the right one, but by the time Liam and I walked out of that office, the plan in my head had already begun. That night, I didn't yell. People expect shouting, plates breaking, doors slamming, something loud enough for the neighbors to hear. But when Amdian walked into the house around 8:30 that evening, the house was quiet, the kind of quiet that makes your footsteps sound louder than usual. Liam was already asleep upstairs. He had insisted we still get ice cream after leaving the office earlier, and the sugar crash knocked him out before dinner even finished. Kids are lucky like that. They sleep through storms they don't even know exist. I was sitting at the kitchen table when Amdian came in, not the living room. The kitchen. That detail matters, I think. Kitchens are where practical conversations happen. Bills. Schedules. Real life. He hung his coat on the back of the chair slowly. Too slowly. Neither of us spoke at first. The refrigerator hummed quietly behind me. The clock above the stove ticked every second like it was keeping score. Tick, tick, tick. Amdian cleared his throat. Camorra, about today. I raised my hand slightly, not aggressively, just enough to pause him. I called a lawyer. The words landed in the room like a dropped glass. He blinked. You what? A lawyer, I repeated calmly. His name is Mr. Callahan. Actually, wait. I think his first name was Robert. Or Richard. Something with an R. The last name I remember clearly because it was printed across the top of the business card sitting on the table. Callahan. Anyway, Amdian stared at me like I'd just switched languages mid-conversation. You called a divorce lawyer. I called a lawyer, I said again. Short sentence. Very deliberate. He pulled out the chair across from me and sat down slowly. For a moment he rubbed his face with both hands, elbows on the table. Camorra, nothing happened. That sentence hung in the air for a second. Then I leaned forward slightly. Amdian. My voice stayed quiet. I heard enough. He looked down at the table, then toward the stairs leading to Liam's room, then back at me. I made a mistake. I nodded. Yes. No shouting. No dramatic speech. Just acknowledgement. That seemed to unsettle him more than anger would have. He shifted in his chair. It didn't mean anything. I let out a small breath through my nose. People always say that part. Always. Then I opened my purse and placed the folded lottery ticket on the table again. Not sliding it, just setting it down. Flat. This, I said, tapping the paper once, means something. He stayed at it, neither of us touched it. The kitchen light reflected off the thin, glossy surface of the ticket. $58 million. A number large enough to tilt a marriage sideways. I spoke to Mr. Callahan this afternoon. I continued. That part was true. Right after Liam fell asleep in the car earlier, I had stepped outside and made the call from the driveway. My hands were shaking so much I nearly dropped the phone. He gave me some advice, I said. Amdian swallowed. What advice? That the ticket was purchased before I confronted you. I paused, watched the realization slowly form across his face. And legally, I added, that timing matters. Silence again. Longer this time. Finally he said, Camorra, are you saying you're leaving me? I considered the question carefully. Actually, that's not entirely honest. The decision had already been forming hours earlier in that hallway outside his office, but hearing it out loud still carried weight. I'm saying, I replied slowly, that our marriage isn't the same marriage it was this morning. He leaned back in the chair like the air had been pushed out of his lungs. Across the table, the lottery ticket sat quietly between us. Paper, ink, possibility. Amdian stared at it for several seconds before speaking again. Are you really going to end 17 years like this? That question landed heavier than the others, not because it changed my mind, but because it forced me to say something difficult out loud. I folded my hands together. I didn't end it. Short pause. You did. He looked away, toward the dark kitchen window. For a moment, neither of us moved. And I know some of you listening might think I was being too cold in that moment. Too calculated. Maybe you would have handled it differently. Honestly, I can understand that. Betrayal pulls people in different directions. But sitting there at that table, with the lawyer's card in front of me and that ticket between us, I realized something very simple. Control isn't loud. Sometimes it's just a woman deciding she's no longer willing to pretend things are normal. And that night, normal was officially over. The divorce itself didn't explode the way people imagine. No courtroom shouting. No dramatic speeches in front of a judge. Mostly paperwork. Stacks of it. Manila folders sliding across polished desks while lawyers spoke in careful, measured sentences that somehow managed to drain the emotion out of everything. Mr. Callahan handled most of the conversations for me. Tall man. Gray hair combed straight back. The kind of lawyer who speaks softly but never wastes a word. He explained things slowly during our first real meeting. Camorra, the timing of that ticket matters legally. He tapped the document with the end of his pen. You purchased it before confronting your husband. That means we have a very strong argument that the winnings remain separate property. I remember nodding, though part of me was still struggling to absorb how strange my life had become in less than 24 hours. Lottery winnings, marriage ending, lawyers discussing percentages like they were dividing furniture. Reality moves quickly sometimes. Actually, not always quickly. That's not quite right. Some days after that felt painfully slow. Waiting for paperwork. Waiting for Amdian's response through his own attorney. Waiting for life to settle into some new shape that none of us had planned. Liam noticed the tension first. Kids always do. One evening he asked me while coloring at the kitchen table, "Why doesn't Dad live here every day in a mall?" His crayons were spread across the table in uneven rows. Green, blue, orange. I sat down beside him and chose my words carefully. "Sometimes adults make mistakes," I said. He looked up at me, like when I spilled juice on the couch. I almost smiled. "Yes," I said softly. "Something like that." Of course the situation was more complicated than spilled juice. But children deserve explanations that match the size of their world. Amdian moved into a small apartment across town during the legal process. Liam visited him on weekends. They went to the park sometimes. Occasionally to that same ice cream shop Liam had been talking about the day everything happened. Life didn't collapse. It rearranged. That's the strange truth people rarely talk about after betrayal. The world keeps functioning. Grocery stores still open. School buses still arrive in the morning. Meanwhile, you're quietly learning how to live in a slightly different version of your life. The money complicated things too. $58 million attracts attention once the claim becomes public record. Financial advisors started appearing like cautious birds circling a new food source. One of them, a woman named Patricia, eventually became my primary advisor. Calm voice, practical approach. Her first piece of advice surprised me. "Don't rush to change everything," she said during our meeting. "Most people assume money should immediately transform a life. Bigger house, new cars, vacation somewhere tropical." But Patricia leaned back in her chair and told me something I've remembered ever since. "Large wealth amplifies who you already are." That sentence stayed with me, because at that moment I wasn't interested in amplifying chaos. I wanted stability, so I stayed in the same house, same neighborhood, same uneven patch of grass in the backyard where Liam liked to practice kicking a soccer ball. Money changed our security. It didn't change who we were. Actually, I should correct that a little. Some things did change permanently. Trust, for example, doesn't repair itself overnight. The first few times Amdian and I exchanged Liam during weekend visits felt awkward. Polite conversations in the driveway. Careful eye contact. He tried apologizing again once. I listened. But apologies don't erase choices. They simply acknowledge them. And over time, the sharp edge of that betrayal softened, not disappeared, but softened enough that our conversations could focus on parenting instead of history. One afternoon months later, after Liam climbed into his father's car, Amdian paused before closing the door. "Camorra," he said quietly, "do you ever think about how things might have gone if that day had been different?" I knew exactly what he meant. If I hadn't walked into that hallway, if the lottery ticket had been revealed in a happy moment instead, if the marriage had remained the version we both pretended it was. I thought about the question for a moment. Actually, longer than a moment. Then I answered honestly. Sometimes. He nodded slowly. Neither of us said anything else. And as his car pulled away from the curb, I found myself wondering something I still think about now and then. If I could step back into that hallway outside his office again, knowing everything I know today, would I make the same decisions? That's not an easy question. I'm curious how you'd answer it in your own life. Have you ever looked back at a turning point and wondered whether you'd choose the same path again if you had the chance? Because standing there in my driveway that afternoon, I realized something quietly important. Even painful choices can lead to a life that still holds peace. It's been a few years now since that afternoon in the hallway, long enough that the memory no longer feels sharp when it surfaces. It's more like an old photograph tucked inside a drawer. You know exactly where it is, but you don't pull it out very often. Life settled into something quieter. Liam is older now, taller every month, it seems. He still visits Amdian regularly, and their relationship stayed strong through everything. That mattered to me more than most people probably realize. Children shouldn't have to carry the weight of adult mistakes. So we didn't let him. The house stayed the same for a long time. Same kitchen table where that conversation happened. Same clock above the stove ticking out ordinary evenings. Tick, tick, tick. Funny thing though, eventually I did replace that clock. Not because it reminded me of anything painful. Actually, no, that's not entirely true. For a while it did. Every time I heard it ticking late at night, I'd remember sitting there with that ticket between us. But after some time, the meaning changed. It stopped being the sound of betrayal. It became the sound of time moving forward. And time does that whether we're ready or not. The money helped, of course. I won't pretend it didn't. Financial freedom removes a certain kind of pressure from life. The quiet anxiety most people carry about bills or emergencies. But money doesn't solve character. It just reveals it. That's something Patricia, the financial advisor, said once during one of our meetings. I didn't fully understand it at the time, but over the years I've seen how true it is. People imagine wealth changes who you are. In reality, it usually just magnifies what was already there. In my case, I think it magnified independence. A life where I could make decisions calmly without fear of financial consequences hanging over every choice. But if you're wondering whether I ever hated Amdian, the honest answer is no. Anger visited for a while. Sure, that's natural. But hatred requires energy, and I eventually realized I preferred spending that energy raising Liam and building a peaceful life instead. Forgiveness is a complicated word, though. Sometimes people think it means pretending something didn't happen. It doesn't. Forgiveness, at least for me, meant acknowledging what happened, and then choosing not to let it keep shaping every day afterward. Those are two very different things. Now and then I still think back to that hallway, the quiet carpet, the closed door, the moment before everything changed. Actually, changed might not be the perfect word. Life was already moving towards something different. I just hadn't noticed the direction yet. That moment simply revealed it. And I suppose that's the part of the story I still find interesting. Two life-altering truths arrived at the exact same time. A betrayal and a fortune. Most people assume the money would be the biggest part of the story, but it wasn't. The real story was about choice, about the quiet moment where a person decides how they are going to respond when the ground under their life suddenly shifts. So let me ask you something honestly before I finish. What do you think matters more in a moment like that? Forgiveness, accountability, or self-respect? I've heard thoughtful arguments for all three over the years, and I'm not sure there's a single answer that fits everyone. Life tends to be more complicated than simple rules. Anyway, that's where the story settles. A hallway, a decision, a future that unfolded differently than the one I imagined while driving downtown with a lottery ticket in my purse. And in the end, I learned something simple. Peace usually comes from the choices we make after the shock fades. So that's my story, folks. If it resonated with you, go ahead and hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where you're listening from. I want to know how far Kimura's voice travels. Self-respect is often the quiet decision that protects the rest of your life.